to really understand a little bit of my journey, we have to go back to my childhood. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a Southern Baptist home that went to church at least 3.5 times a week. We had all the involvement that one could have with youth group and many, many different activities. And from the time I was a child, I was always asking questions. And if you ask my husband, I'm still asking questions all the time anyhow. But I couldn't put together some of the things that I saw and I read and that I heard. We were constantly being told that God is love and shown these beautiful pictures of Jesus welcoming all the children of the world that were all different colors. But then at the same time, you were getting the message, well, the Black people have their churches and they're more comfortable in their own churches. They don't need to come to our church. And that didn't work for me. I was very confused about it. My Sunday school teachers were probably pulling their hair out because I was asking all kinds of questions that they didn't really have answers for. It was like, well, if Jesus is God, then why is he praying to himself? And they would just go, oh, well, that's just the way it is, and that type of thing. So I was always wondering and always seeking. I went away to a Southern Baptist College in Tennessee. It didn't get any better. I started going to the Presbyterian church, much to my parents' dismay. So I just continued asking questions. I went to an international festival when I had finished college and picked up some materials from a booth on the Baha'i Faith. And as I read these materials, I began to find answers to many of the questions that I had been asking. I continued, started going to some Baha'i meetings and reading a lot of different things. Finally sat down and reread the Bible from cover to cover, just to see if there were any problems with what I was about to do. And then I became a Baha'i. Again, much to my parents' dismay. The Baha'i Faith is a worldwide independent religion. And we have Baha'is on every continent and every country on the planet. And the Baha'i International World Center is on Mount Carmel in Israel. We also have temples on every major continent. And the fascinating thing about many of these temples is that when they were designed, the technology didn't always exist to build them. The technology had to be invented to be put into place as the temples were designed. The one in the top center is the one that is in Wilmette, Illinois. And that's the one we have on this particular continent. We are also now in the process of building some temples in different cities and different places in the world where the largest numbers of Baha'is are. Okay, so Baha'is are followers of Baha'u'llah, and we believe that he is the promised one of all the ages. Baha'u'llah says that all prophets have striven to make love manifest in the hearts of men. His Holiness Jesus Christ sought to create this love in the hearts. He suffered all difficulties and ordeals that the human heart might become the fountain source of love. Therefore, we must strive with all our heart and soul to take this love so that this love may possess us, so that all humanity may be connected through the bond of this divine affection. For we are all the waves of one sea. The lights of earth are all acceptable, but the center of effulgence is the sun. And we must direct our gaze to the sun. God is the supreme center. The more we turn toward the center of light, the greater will be our capacity. Which is the next slide. Okay, Baha'u'llah teaches us that God is an unknowable essence. and that we can really only know him through his manifestations. But we believe, as most religions do, that God is the creator of all things. Baha'u'llah says, O Son of Man, I loved thy creation, hence I created thee. Wherefore do thou love me, that I may name thy name and fill thy soul with the spirit of life. So Baha'is believe that that God has put into place a progressive revelation, that there have been throughout time manifestations that have come to earth to try to guide humankind. The first named prophet that we know of is Abraham, and then Krishna, and then Moses, Zoroaster, which was the religion that had the wise men that went seeking the birth of the baby Jesus because they were following the star. Then there was Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, and the latest two prophets, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The Bab was the herald of the Baha'i Faith. Just in some way similar to the way John the Baptist came and began to prepare people for the coming of Jesus, the Bab did the same. The Bab's place is a little bit unique in that he actually began to write down revelation from God. There were specific calendar put into place and laws and prayers. But basically, all of the manifestations of God have given their lives for the salvation of humanity. Whether they gave their lives through imminent torture or death, or whether they gave their life on a very daily basis of living their life for mankind. There were many types of sacrifice. So one of my favorite prayers from the Bab is this one. He says, God suffices all things above all things, and nothing in the heavens or in the earth but God suffices. Verily, he is in himself the knower, the sustainer, the omnipotent. So for 6 years, the Bab taught ceaselessly that the appearance of the new manifestation of God was near, and to prepare the way for his coming, at the dawn of the new age and the dawn of the promised day of God. He declared in 1844. At that point in time, there was a sect of the Muslim religion that was preaching and preparing followers to look for the next manifestation. As you look through prophecies in all the different religions and follow some of these prophecies, there are certain time periods that become very important. In this country, in 1844, many people were going to the mountainsides to look for the return of Christ. They were giving away many of their possessions. Many religions were being made anew and even becoming as new religions. The Seventh-day Adventist religion started during this time. Mary Baker Eddy and the Christian Scientists. So there was a search in the whole world for what was going to be happening. So even though the Bab's message was one of peace and unity, the government in Iran was concerned that all these people were flocking to this new religion and these new ideas. And of course, the Muslim clerics and the imams were also very concerned, because they were concerned that they would be losing their position, just as some of the same concerns happened when Jesus came with his message. And the Jewish clergy were not really excited about, yeah, let's start this thing all over again. So the first response for the Iranians was to martyr the Bab. The Bab was 31. He was martyred by a regiment of soldiers. This was documented by European observers at the time. Messages were sent back to Europe about what was going on and happening. Now, the Bab, who would have been like our first prophet, and then Baha'u'llah II, never actually met in person, but they did communicate through letters. And so when the Bab was martyred, the people were thrown into turmoil. It was, like, well, what are we doing next and what's going to happen? So basically, they began to turn to one another and also to Baha'u'llah, who showed great leadership at this time. Baha'u'llah was born in 1870 in Tehran, Iran, and he was born to a very, very wealthy family. Had he followed the path that his family had laid out for him, he would have been a senior minister at court. He could have had anything he wanted. Money was no issue, but that was not the path that he was to follow. But from his early childhood, he showed signs of greatness, very little need for real education. He seemed to know what he needed to know at the time. So the Iranian government again was thrown into a question, well, what are we going to do? This religion is not dying. It's not going away. We killed the first person and it just got bigger. So maybe we need to try something different. So in 1855, they exiled Baha'u'llah from Tehran. This was after they had thrown him into the worst prison that the Iranians could offer. It was called the Black Pit, the Sea of Chaw. It was an old reservoir that they put people in chains and fetters, and was a very terrible ordeal. He had been there for quite a few months when they decided to exile him. So he and his family and many of his followers were exiled basically on foot in the early springtime from Tehran to Baghdad. And the Iranians were thinking, okay, good, we got this done, we're finished with this. Well, he gets to Baghdad and everybody loves him. And people began to follow his teachings. And so they said, okay, we're going to send him to Constantinople, which is the modern day city of Istanbul. And they moved him from Constantinople to Adrianople, which is across the isthmus, and thinking that they had everything in control now. So by this time, the Iranian government and the Ottoman Empire that was in charge of the Turkish area were now in cahoots together because nobody wanted to explore these new ideas. That really didn't seem to work because people were still traveling to visit him. And so they then exiled him to the prison city of Akka, which at that time was known as one of the most pestilent places on the planet. The comment was that if a bird flew over Akka, it would die. And he and his family and some of the followers were exiled to this prison city. It didn't really work. People were still walking on foot from Iran to Akka to stand out on a little rise outside of the prison and wait for hours to get to see a wave of his hand or his cloak as he would go by. So every effort was made by these two powerful courts, the King of Iran and the Ottoman Empire, to oppose Baha'u'llah and his teachings. But the light of truth is not so easily extinguished. In spite of the constant persecution, Baha'u'llah continued to reveal the word of God for more than 40 years. So Baha'is have over 400 books of passages that we believe are direct revelation from God through Baha'u'llah. Some written in his hand, some written by secretaries that were there for him. So this is a first in human history because none of the other prophets had the ability to put down their messages in writing directly. So in the spring of 1890, he was visited by Edward Granville Brown, who was an educator from Oxford, another one of the Europeans that had come to visit. And this is what Baha'u'llah told Edward Granville Brown. He said, "We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations. Yet they deem us up a stirrer of strife and sedition, worthy of bondage and banishment. That all nations should become one faith and all men as brothers. That the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened. That diversity of religions should cease and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be, these fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Do you in Europe need this also? Is this not what Christ foretold? Yet do we see your kings and rulers lavishing their treasures more freely on means for the destruction of the human race than on that which would conduce to the happiness of mankind. These strifes and this bloodshed and this discord must cease, and all men be as one kindred and one family. Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind." I find it fascinating that in spring of 1890, prior to World War I, prior to World War II, there was this individual that was asking for the diversity of religions to cease, the differences of race be annulled. Can you imagine what our world would be like today had these things taken place? I noticed I got here a little bit early, so I was driving around a little bit just to calm myself down. I think I counted about 20 different churches within a 6-block area. United States, we have more than 400 sects of Christianity. And some of them believe the others are going to hell. So it's just unimaginable how much the human race can break things apart into these little bitty pieces and yet miss the entire picture of what's going on. So after Baha'u'llah died, the faith was left to the guidance of Abdul Baha, who was his eldest son. Abdul Baha had the opportunity to travel. People in Europe and the United States that had heard about the faith helped him to travel to Europe and to the United States. He went from Boston to Chicago to California by train. Debbie Hirsch, one of the newspaper magnates, became a Baha'i, was very interested in having him share this religion in different places. And then prior to World War I, he returned to Palestine at that time. It wasn't quite Israel yet. Things are still changing. So all of this helped to grow the Baha'i faith. Many rich Americans that had the funds would go to Haifa on pilgrimage. The faith was being shared in India at this time, many places, Africa. And so we have the organization today known as the Baha'is. We're not allowed to have the New Day Baha'is, the Second Avenue Baha'is. It's only one faith. And we are guided by the Universal House of Justice, which meets in this building, which is set on Mount Carmel. The Universal House of Justice is elected by members of the National Spiritual Assemblies of every country that has a National Spiritual Assembly. And those National Spiritual Assemblies are elected by a local spiritual assembly. whenever we have enough people in a specific area, we elect a local spiritual assembly of 9 members. So it's very democratic in nature. And as Barbara has already alluded to, we share many of the same tenets. We believe in the independent investigation of truth. That each person has the responsibility to investigate for themselves whether a particular message is true or not. We believe in the oneness of religion, that the essence, the teachings of the religion, that we should love God, that we should love our neighbors as ourselves, thou shalt not kill, all of these things are threaded through all the major religions. We believe in the elimination of prejudice of all kinds, men, women, ageism, class, in addition to, of course, America's largest problem, which is the racial issue. We believe that religion should cause love, affection, and joy. The harmony of science and religion, that science without religion is materialism, and religion without science is just mysticism. We believe that at some point there should be a universal auxiliary language in addition to each person's individual home language. And we believe in universal compulsory education. Everybody should have the same opportunity for growth. We believe in gender equality, that as a bird flies, the wing of one wing is the woman and the other wing is the man. And that if they're not able to both work together, then the bird doesn't fly. I think Afghanistan is an excellent example of this. That when the Taliban first came to power, not this time, but the time before, one of the first things they did was go into all the government offices and send all the women home. And they said, you can't work. Well, you've just crippled your entire government. But we believe in the elimination of the extremes of wealth and poverty, but we also believe there's a spiritual solution to the economic situation, that when people reach a certain spiritual state, they would recognize that, hey, I don't need $4 billion this week. Let me see what I can do to spread this around. But it's ultimately a spiritual decision that each person has to make from their heart. And we believe in human rights for all. So in an effort to build spiritual capacity for community building, the Baha'is developed courses of studies, and these courses of study are used all over the world. The same book is just translated in different languages, and people study them. The first book is called Reflections on the Life of the Spirit. And in this book, we explore some of the Baha'i writings. We explore the topic of prayer, which is always very close to people that are looking for spirituality. And then we also discuss or explore the concept of life and death. And, you know, if the last few years haven't convinced some of us a little bit more about mortality, I'm not quite sure what will. So it's an interesting topic. And these books can be done in groups of 1, in groups of 20. It depends, just whenever people are interested, we put together a study group. The second book has to do with arising to serve, because what is spirituality if we're not going to use it to help better our fellow man? As we believe in education for all, we also have a series of studies for children's classes. But most importantly, lately, we've been focusing on junior youth development. The 11 to 13 age, those that are neither children and neither youth or adults yet. And they are worked with in programs, kids from all denominations, that are centered in values education and service to community, and helping them find a purpose for their own lives. I really think it's a very important age group that, if not dealt with or educated properly can start kids on a, a lifetime search of trying to figure out, what am I doing? Where am I going? And we know how that ends up a lot of times. So Barbara mentioned spirituality, and this kind of stumped me because it didn't really stump me, but I'm not one of those people that's able to sit and meditate for 30 minutes and feel like I'm really becoming spiritual. And I really thought about a lot of it. And personally for me, my sense of spirituality really goes into play when I'm doing something to serve other people. I noticed a few years ago that if I got depressed about something, that the best thing for me to do was to get up and go help somebody who didn't have some of the things I had, or didn't have, I could always find somebody that needed something more than I did. And I discovered that even as I started, I would feel like, I don't really want to go do this, but I would make myself do it. And by the end of the day, I really felt a lot better. And I felt more connected to the world and more connected to God than I had sitting there thinking, oh, everything's so bad. So I found this quote that I really like. It says that when individuals attempt to lead patient lives of active service, the process gradually remakes those who exert themselves into aware, loving, and other-directed people who can bring light into the world. So as Abdul Wahab says, let your actions cry aloud to the world that you are indeed Baha'is. For it is actions that speak to the world and are the cause of the progress of humanity. Our actions will help the world, will spread civilization, will help the progress of science and cause the arts to develop. Without action, nothing in the material world can be accomplished. Neither can words unaided advance a man in the spiritual kingdom. It is not through lip service only that the elect of God have attained to holiness, but by patient lives of active service that have brought light into the world. Therefore, strive that your actions day by day may be beautiful prayers. Turn towards God and seek always to do that which is right and noble. Enrich the poor, raise the fallen, comfort the sorrowful, bring healing to the sick, reassure the fearful, rescue the oppressed, bring hope to the hopeless, shelter the destitute. This is from Abdul Wahab.